Hello! This is California Convictions. My name is Aaron Channel, and I speak about my experiences in prison, specifically the California Department of Corrections. They changed the name to the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation whenever I was incarcerated, but I still think of it as CDC, not CDCR. That rehabilitation was a little bit redundant and a little bit pointless. Today, I intend to speak about my experiences in the prison visiting room. The prison visiting room is a unique place. I don't think you're going to find a lot of environments like it in the whole world. I realize that sounds a little bit glib or perhaps optimistic, that it's a big world. But you have to understand that prison visiting rooms are a world apart from prison itself. Prison is designed to, frankly, be a bad place. I'm not saying that they intentionally make it worse than it has to be, but there's no real consideration for inmate quality of life. The purpose of prison is to house inmates at a reasonable level of quality of life. It can't be cruel or unusual. Beyond that, it's supposed to be a bad place, at least to some degree. So, you spend your days, weeks, months, even years in a very gray and drab environment. All right, Dave, well, thanks for checking in, and we'll see you tonight whenever you watch in the repeat. The prison environment is very gray and drab. I recall reading a study that showed that laboratory rats and mice that were housed in cages that had nothing to interact with, meaning just a bare cage, showed brain atrophy whenever compared to mice or rats that were in interactive environments, meaning they had little tunnels to run through and places to explore. It was still a cage, but it was a cage designed to keep the rats thinking, occupied, interacting with their environment. That is not how prison is designed. It is designed as a cage to just keep you calm, stable, secure. But they don't care, honestly, at the end of the day, if you had a TV or a book or whatever it is that you use to entertain yourself. They care that you didn't escape, that you didn't get out and hurt anybody, that you didn't find a way to hurt anybody while incarcerated. The prison visiting room. You spend days, weeks, months locked in this gray, drab environment. It's gray concrete walls. It's bare steel. The most color you see is probably an inspirational poster on the inside of an office of a staff member saying something like, if you try real hard, you can change your life, it's not too late, with some color in the background. Or the shiny steel on the concertina wire that they have over all the fences. You step out into that prison visiting room, and your first thought is you can't wait to see your family. Your wife, your children, your mother, whoever it is that took the time out of their day to come and see you, out of their week, honestly, because it can be quite a drive to visit an inmate. That's your first thought. And then you step out and you're overwhelmed by all of the stimuli. Maybe you smell the burritos or the stupid tacos that are cooking in the microwave because you're able to buy food for your inmate and prepare it for him and feed it to him. And that's the first time you've smelt any non-institutional food in a very long time. It hits you. Your stomach goes, oh my goodness, what is that new smell? And then you look up, and there's a play area for the children where there are big cartoon drawings, maybe some Care Bears dancing against the edge of the wall, and mats on the floor, and a little fenced area for them to play in because kids need some place that's just for them, and a lot of children visit inmates. It's the most color you've seen in a very long time. And then the noise hits you. It's not the same as a chow hall or the yard, where by and large everybody's pretty quiet. Inmates talk like this, down to themselves, so that you can't be heard from too far away by and large. Maybe there's loud noises on the prison yard, but you pay attention whenever you hear them. There's running keys or the bam of a block gun. The guards yelling while the alarm goes, woo, woo, and they go, get down, get down. Those are the loud noises you're used to hearing. And you open up this door and step out into the prison visiting room, and it's the smells and everything you see, and then the sound. because it's 60 people, 100 people, maybe 200 people that are seeing each other for the first time in a long time. Everybody's happy. They're laughing and they're hugging and they're talking at a quick, excited pace. Tell me about your day. What happened? It's overwhelming. You get hit with this like it's a brick to the side of your face. You freeze for a couple seconds. The first time you step out there, maybe the 50th time you step out there. I know I felt a little overwhelmed with everything going on every time I stepped out. In previous videos, I've described the prison visiting room as like the scene in The Wizard of Oz, where Dorothy has been in Kansas and everything has been just quiet and subdued and black and white with just shades of gray, and then she wakes up and looks around, and it's beautiful Technicolor with the vibrant greens and reds that you haven't seen. It really is overwhelming. Let's see here. Jack's Drinker says he normally puts it on charge and continues watching. Technology has come a long way, and that is very true. Depends on the phone, depends on the tablet. A lot of them you can plug and play, though it can kill your battery, to my understanding. And Sunset notes that this is pretty interesting and asks me to describe prison food. Assuming that you're an American, prison food is really easy to describe. You remember elementary school? You'd all walk along in a little line, and you'd hold out you'd get your tray or whatever it was from the lunch lady. And listen, it wasn't inedible. At the same time, it wasn't good. And it was certainly nutritious. There was enough there that if kids ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the school every day, yeah, they'd be fine. But they'd come home complaining every day because the little square of pizza that you got on your tray was frankly pretty dry and had grease running off the edges. And the vegetables that you got were all boiled to death so that they were slimy. Prison food is an interesting thing because you read the menu, and I will post one of these days a menu. They're still publicly available, CDCR's 90-day menu. And that's what they have, is a 90-day menu. It rotates every 3 months. The breakfast is the same almost all the time. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. You know what you're going to get. Some meals are like every other week. On Fridays, you get SOS most of the time, but every third week they'll give you hash instead. But you know by and large what you're going to get for breakfast. It would be, for instance, on Monday, 3 silver dollar pancakes with some sugar-free dietetic syrup. They give you the sugar-free stuff so that you can't make pruno with it. You would get a little milk carton, exactly like you got whenever you were in elementary school, and a little juice carton, exactly like you got when you were in elementary school. It would come with 2 small sausage links, which were a little chewy, but were actual meat. And if you wanted it, there was Kool-Aid that you could put into your state cup there at the front of the chow hall. Additionally, there would be a couple spoonfuls of some kind of hot cereal, grits, oatmeal. Every once in a while, they would give you the cold cereal, and that was always the favorite thing for inmates to get compared to the hot sludge. Inmates often complained about food whenever I was incarcerated. Gosh, I wouldn't feed this to my dog. This is cruel and unusual punishment. Why hasn't anybody been sued about this? And I always kind of laughed. Listen, it's not great. I'm going to be frank about that. There's not one meal they had in prison that you could put in front of me today that I would have any response but, oh, God, that? But that said, nobody walked out of the chow hall hungry if they were willing to eat what was in front of them. And sometimes it was bad enough that plenty of people walked out of the chow hall hungry rather than having eaten it. But nobody starved in prison. Nobody lost weight in prison. And if you were actually hungry, you just raise your hand and holler, hey, does anybody have something they're not eating? There would be 20 dudes who didn't want the worst part of their meal, whatever it is, and they'd slide it over to you. And then you consider the expense to the taxpayer. I worked as a clerk. One of the clerk's jobs is to do research to help officers with their write-ups. If somebody steals a meal out of the chow hall, meaning that they went and got their tray and they ate it and they looked around and saw nobody was looking, so they jumped up and got back in line to get another tray, which is a common occurrence. It happens at least a dozen, maybe even 20 times out of the 1,000 inmates that eat. If you're quick, you can get away with it. Of course, occasionally an officer will see you doing it. He'll go, "Oh, you just stole. Well, I'm going to have to write you up for that." And he'd come to me and say, "Hey, Channel, inmate stole this tray right here, whatever the heck was on it. What is that? Is he in trouble for that?" And I'd have to go look in the rules and say, "Well, actually, that meal is worth $1.06. And so you need to write up in the report that he stole $1.06 worth of state food. That's what he's in trouble for. It's theft of state food." As a result, I had a little chart. This is everything we eat, and this is what it's worth. And $1 a meal is actually pretty high. Most of the meals were worth about 80 cents, maybe 90 cents. Some of them that had good stuff, like there was a meal that came with a sausage link. The sausage link was worth 40 cents, every one of them. So some meals were more expensive than others, but they were all under $1.50. Can you imagine going into a diner, little hard on your luck, and you walk in and you go, "Hey, excuse me, man, I got $1.10. Put it down on the table. What can you get me?" And he comes out with 3 silver dollar pancakes, a little carton of milk, a little carton of juice, a couple of spoons of oatmeal, maybe some dry scrambled eggs, some bread on the side, some syrup. No, that costs you $4, $5, 10 at the wrong place. $1. CDC absolutely, and mind you, they're not spending much on what they provide the inmates, but they get a good deal for the taxpayers, and they do keep everybody fed. I did a video a while back on various aspects of the prison dining experience, and I may speak about it at greater length. It's also interesting to note that many of the meals that inmates receive are special diet meals, which means that they've requested, they said, "I want to be on a vegetarian diet. I want to be on the kosher diet." Perhaps they have a medical problem. They're allergic to a certain food item, or they have a gluten allergy. I can't remember what that's called, celiac disease. In the event you have any of these things that you bring up to staff, there are a number of alternate diets that you may be permitted to receive. And so there's actually a wide variety of what inmates can and do eat in California, but it's all pretty much the same stuff. It's cheaply manufactured and nutritionally dense food, but it's not delicious, and it's not intended to be. Again, prison is a bad place, and to some degree it's supposed to be. SOS, which I mentioned as one of the meals that you may eat, is stuff on a shingle. They call it that because it's biscuits and gravy. You get biscuits that are sliced in half and put down, and then a couple of spoons of beef chip gravy put over it. It's traditionally called a different word than stuff on a shingle, and it was a Navy meal prior to it being so well known in prison. I spoke to a number of Navy guys from way back that said, "Oh yeah, SOS, that's what you get in the Navy a lot." A lot of what you receive in prison is that type of meal, meaning some kind of slop, chipped beef, or chicken and gravy, or anything like that that has a good amount of nutrition and a little bit of protein, but it's basically just slimy, floury stuff that you slop down on rice or biscuits or beans or anything like that, a base and then some slop. Because it's easy to manufacture that in huge amounts. You need to make 100 gallons of that. It's really not that hard to do. And then you divvy it up amongst all the yards and slop it out onto the tray. But I was speaking primarily about experiences in the prison visiting room. And I want to reiterate how different from prison the prison visiting room is. Though there are some aspects of it that are the same. And yes, it is absolutely true that you can get kosher food if you are Jewish. In fact, because my wife is a rabbi and I have some Jewish lineage, I was eligible to receive the kosher meals while I was incarcerated, and I did for a large portion of my time. One interesting aspect of the kosher meals is that you are required to eat nothing but kosher food. You've went to the staff and said that you have a deeply held and sincere religious requirement to eat kosher food. And they've accommodated you. They've said, "Wow, we don't want to violate your religious rights." Absolutely. We'll make sure we don't give you anything that is non-kosher. And then if they catch you eating a bunch of sausage and top ramen soups and whatever it is that is not kosher, They will write you up for it and say that you're obviously manipulating the system because you claimed you couldn't eat this stuff. It was so important to you that they had to accommodate your diet, and they caught you in the back room shoveling down a bunch of candy bars. This is important to the conversation of prison visiting because the visiting rooms do not have kosher meals of any type. And if they're not required to have a vending machine that's clearly marked as just kosher food. But there were occasions, because I didn't worry too much about following kosher, honestly. Even whenever I was on the kosher diet, I viewed it more as an opportunity to get different or better food than I viewed it as a connection to God or anything vitally important to my religious beliefs. But frankly, in prison, I was happy to get enough nutrition that I felt full, sated, and comfortable, rather than being terribly concerned about the specific nature of what I was eating. However, I had friends who were legitimately, sincerely, and deeply Jewish, meaning that they would elect to not eat and go hungry rather than eat something that might not be kosher, because that was their relationship with their deity. One way that this played out was that in the prison visiting room, I had to have a mental note of what items you could get out of those vending machines that were actually kosher, so that in the event I had a friend say, hey man, what can I eat out here without violating the precepts of my religion, or possibly getting written up for manipulating staff because I told them I only eat kosher, what can I eat? And I would know, well, those hamburgers are not okay, but those burritos over there are. That juice is okay, and that eggnog is not. Not just because I had a reasonable understanding of kashrut law, but because whenever you buy these things individually, you can take a couple of minutes and look at the back and see whether or not it's marked as kosher, parve, or whatever other sub-delineation of kosher food there is. Slick armor. You step out into this prison visiting room, and you're overwhelmed with the smells and the sights and the sound. And just as you're freezing just a little bit and going, holy cow, this is a lot going on, you look up, and your family member is going to be out there first, generally. They don't call you to the visit until after they're already sitting down, which means they may have been waiting for a half hour, even more, depending on how quickly you got out there. They probably have a soda or even a hamburger out on the table, and they're bored. Maybe they got a book or a deck of cards, or they're just... But they've been waiting for you to get there for a long time. They may not have even noticed that door open. You probably saw them before they saw you. And then your eyes lock. And this is probably somebody that you love sincerely. Very few people in prison are visited by acquaintances. Your acquaintances wrote you off whenever you picked up that time. Heck, most of your friends and some of your family wrote you off whenever you got 5 years in prison. If I'm being frank, most of the people in my life, if they got 5 years in prison, they'd be lucky if they got a letter from me. And I don't mean that in a dismissive way. I just mean that it is a huge investment of time and energy to maintain a relationship with somebody who's incarcerated. And unless you actually sincerely love them, you care for them, well, why are you going to bother? And this is the first time you've seen that person. Months, years even. And your eyes lock and your heart drops down into your stomach. Oh my goodness, it's my wife, it's my son, it's my father. You can fill in the blank, but... And you walk over to them and you're trying not to make a scene. You want to run and yell, and oh my God, I've missed you. And well, that's not what you're supposed to do. You are allowed a hug and a kiss at the beginning of the family visit, and you're allowed very little physical contact with people in prison. That hug and a kiss counts for so much. And you walk up to them and you wrap an arm around them, and depending on your relationship, maybe it's a kiss on the cheek, a kiss on the lips, or just a moment of hugging them and really seeing that they're truly there, that you're not alone. And you sit down, and now is whenever things get a little different depending on where you are. CDC is delineated, divided, broken up into two different types of yards. There's the active yards and the SNY yards. I've talked about this at some length, but essentially, if you're involved in gangs, if you buy into any of the racist crap, Well, you're on the active yards. And if you can't make it there, or you got something on your jacket that makes it so you can't make it there, for instance, you're a child molester, a rapist, a rat, an undercover cop, anything like that, the type of thing that other inmates hear and they go, oh, God. Well, I'm just going to have to stab you. It's nothing personal, but I don't want to be known as the guy that was friends with a fill in the blank. You don't go to the active yards. You go to an SNY yard, which is one of those annoying acronyms. SNY stands for Sensitive Needs Yard, so it's a sensitive needs yard. On the active yards, because there are real killers on this yard, and some of them are very concerned about how they're perceived. You imagine you're in a gang. You're in your 40s, and you're known as the guy who will end a life at the drop of a hat. You've won fights. You've been in riots. You're a strong, tough dude. Your reputation is part of what keeps you safe. The fact that people know, don't mess with Johnny, he will end your life. That's important. It is a valuable thing to have. And then you're in the visiting room with your family. Your mom is there. And some dude accidentally bumps into her whenever he's walking backwards and sends her sprawling. You're going to have to kill that guy. I mean, what other option do you have? Dude knocked your mom to the ground in front of 50 people. And I don't mean you're going to take flight on him then. I mean, you're going to go out to the yard and he and you are going to have a real conversation about how his life is going to end in a couple of hours. You'll tell him it's all good at the time. No, don't worry, brother. It's all good. Talk about it later. And even if it isn't that extreme, even if it isn't Johnny who's worried about his reputation, it's still Frank who doesn't want to offend anybody. So you go out in that prison visiting room whenever you're active and everybody is so absurdly polite. Polite to the point of silliness. You need to walk past a couple of guys and they're not even really in your way. It's just you're going to have to walk a little bit too close to them and they see you. And you stop and you wait for them to look at you. If they're talking, you wait a whole 5 seconds or something like that. Not longer than that because they're not trying to be rude either, but you wait. And then once they look at you, go, hey, excuse me, I got to slide past. And you real carefully walk around them. Family members do this too, and everybody is absurdly polite. It's a matter of showing respect. Similarly, the staff. On the active yards, the staff, by and large, and not entirely, because there are some asterisks, but by and large, they are very respectful to both the inmates and their visitors. They don't want to start a problem. They know that Frank doesn't have a lot left in his life. He's doing life without. He's killed 3 men since he got incarcerated. He's out there in that visiting room visiting his brother for the first time. You really want to be rude to Frank? No, nobody does. Not if they can help it. Not even the staff. The SNY yards were just a little bit different. This was because it was a more social environment. I was speaking to my wife recently about her experiences in the prison visiting room, trying to think about what I was going to talk about in this video. And she pointed out that in the years that she had visited me at High Desert, and she visited me 100 times there, she didn't think I'd introduced her to one person. Never, hey, this is my friend Frank, or this is Bob that lives down the tier, and this is his family. Whereas, whenever we were SNY, whenever I was on the other side of the line, I was commonly introducing her to people. I introduced her to 3 or 4 cellies, 5 or 6 friends, and probably a dozen random people that I knew just a little who happened to be a part of the conversation. Hey, excuse me, Aaron, let me get past. Oh, absolutely. Hey, honey, this is Frank. He's the fill in the blank. And this is because on the active yards, you're so careful about showing respect that you end up speaking a lot less than you would otherwise. You're so careful about not saying the wrong thing to the wrong guy, you just don't say the thing to the guy. As opposed to on the SNY yards. Yes, there are killers on their yards. There are some dudes that are retired that, frankly, if they had to, they'd end your life like that and they wouldn't think about it after you finished bleeding out on the ground. Had plenty of friends who I have no question they wouldn't have thought about me after I finished dying. And yes, I still call them a friend because that was the way they were. It's just who they were. I can't tell you what was broken or different in their brains, but there are real killers in prison, both active and SNY. The difference is the guys on the SNY side are at least claiming to be retired. They don't want more trouble. They left the line to get out of the trouble. Sunset asks what I mean whenever I said you can have something nasty on your jacket. That's prison slang. Your jacket is the list of crimes that you were convicted of and the stuff in your official prison file. Somebody who has something nasty on their jacket means that even if they're in there this time on a burglary, for instance, which is considered to be a perfectly acceptable crime for an inmate to have committed, you get looking in their file and you find out that actually their last prison term they were in there for raping children. Something awful, something truly disgusting. He got something nasty on his jacket. He was blending in, pretending to be a regular inmate, but he's actually a piece of garbage. The accepted response whenever you find out that somebody is one of these things, a sex offender, a rat, a cop, is the POS cut, the piece of cut. And they take a knife, razor blade, anything sharp, and they cross your face. Deeper the better, the closer to the eyes, the better. And if they can blind you, that's great, but that's not the point of it. The point is, for the rest of your life, anytime somebody sees your face, the first thing they see is this big, thick cut on your face. And hopefully they ask, "Hey, Frank, how'd you get that scar anyway? That looks bad." And then he's got to come up for an excuse about how in prison there was a misunderstanding and they thought that he was a rapist, but he really isn't. It's a way of branding somebody, making it really clear that they were not accepted in the prison culture. Let's see here. Shelton Todd asks, what's the protocol to visit an inmate? Do you have to make an appointment? Absolutely. And not only do you have to make an appointment, at least in California, first you have to have been cleared to visit the inmate. If you show up at a prison where you know your friend or family member is, it is possible that they will allow you to see them. I saw it happen. The reason it's possible is because they have you fill out something called a prison visiting form, which involves a slight background check if you've ever been committed of a felony, and a bunch of questions about who you are, your ID number. You state that you understand that you will not be a viable hostage in the event you are taken, that your life is forfeit. If an inmate holds a knife to your throat, they're not going to let him walk out the gate. And if you haven't filled that form out and sent it in and had it processed, which can take several weeks prior to arriving to seeing your inmate, in all likelihood, you will be refused access to them. They'll say, sorry, this form needs to be filled out and processed first. They have the capacity to fill it out and process it immediately, and I did see that happen. But that's frankly at the officer's discretion, because he's going to have to sit down on a computer and pump all this information in and spend a half hour helping you get in to see your inmate. If you haven't done that and been notified that you are approved to visit whoever it is you want to, in all likelihood, whenever you show up at the institution, you're going to be turned away. In the event you filled out the form, and if it is a day whenever visiting is permitted, and visiting is permitted at different hours and different days at different institutions, but by and large, it's 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. on Saturday and Sunday nowadays in California, which is a sizable amount of time. 6 hours with a family member is a long time to hang out with them. But if you show up and you don't have a, hey, $10 from Drones, I'll read his comment in a minute, thanks, man. In the event that you show up and you haven't called in and made an appointment, say I'd like to see my inmate at 10 a.m. on Saturday, it can take a long, long time to process in, 3 hours more. And you're just going to stand in line. You have to wait. You can't go and come back. You're just going to have to stand in line and slowly process your way to the front. Alternately, if you've made an appointment, you can still end up waiting a long time, or you can be asked to leave early because there's only so much visiting space. There's the fire marshal has said there can't be more than 200 people in this room. The staff are not going to go to great lengths to make sure that everybody gets as much time as they could. They're just going to say, okay, well, the people who got here first, get out so we can bring some new people in. If you want to see your family, drive X number of miles and come back next week. Drones says, your channel will take time to build, but I wish you luck. What kind of miserable life will a child rapist have been San Quentin? San Quentin is a nasty place for somebody who's doing time anywhere, somebody who's doing time for any reason, I can tell you that. And sex offenders have a bad time in prison. Most of what the media sells is not true. The idea that sex offenders are routinely tortured or murdered by inmates or guards simply isn't true. And if it were, there would be a huge mortality rate of sex offenders. We'd hear about them hanging themselves instead of get daily beatings on the yard. The administration takes great lengths to make sure that they're only housed on yards by themselves or with people who have agreed, I promise I won't hurt the pedophiles. Really, I mean it. And they do really mean it, because they're there hiding from something else. Myself, I had a problem with the Aryan Brotherhood. It was a little problem. But there's no such thing as a little problem with the Aryan Brotherhood. And so whenever the administration asked, well, do you want to stay on the yard with these guys, or do you want to go live with the sex offenders? It was a pretty easy choice for me, which I preferred. You know, it's swallowing my bile and biting my tongue and pretending like I didn't have contempt for them, or getting stabbed. It was unpleasant, but it was an easy choice. That's not why they have such a bad time. It's the low-grade bullying. Anyone who remembers elementary school knows there was the weird kid, the slow kid, the stinky kid, whatever he was, that everybody made fun of just a little. And hopefully he grew up and got his life together and lived a wonderful life. I have nothing against the slow kid or the stinky kid. In prison, it's not the slow guy or the stinky guy, it's the sex offender. That's who everybody hates. And whenever he walks up and goes, hey, excuse me, can I get in front of you in line? You tell him, hell no, Chester, get to the back of the line where you belong. That's as much as it is. Maybe they leave something down and don't think about it. They have their candy bar and they set it down on the table and go walk to get some water. And they come back and their candy bar is gone. And they go, hey, did anybody see who took my stuff? And somebody says, I sure did, and he deserves it more than you, pedophile. You. And that's just the way it is. That type of low-grade nastiness, it adds up in ways that are difficult to explain. And I absolutely think that anybody who goes to prison for something nasty like that, at the end of a couple of months or a year, they have a real low quality of life. They wake up and they're miserable and they go to bed and they're miserable. And I have no sympathy for them, because it's not a tenth of what they deserved. Should thank their lucky stars that we have a system that allows those pieces of garbage to live out their years, and hopefully it's every last one of them locked up. Let's see here. Sunset asks how one can look deep into an inmate's past crimes. Whenever I was doing time, it was common for inmates to actually get access to the physical paper C-file, because CDC still kept everything on paper. You did a prison term 10 years ago, and then you started your new prison term and you got in trouble for something, and the cop had to look at your record to see what kind of trouble you'd been in before and how seriously they were going to punish you for instance, mouthing off to a guard. Well, it matters if you've ever done it before. And so they bring all the paperwork they have on you, called a C file or a central file, and leave it in the office. As a clerk, it was common for me to have short periods of access to an inmate's central file. Not enough time to read every page, but certainly enough time to open it up and do that real quick and go, wow, I thought Frank said he was in here on a burglary. I thought Johnny said he was in on a drug case. A drug case. I didn't realize he meant he drug a kid into the bushes. That was the joke. Yeah, a drug case. You drug some kids into the bushes. That's what you did. Gallows humor, I suppose. Nowadays, they just use cell phones. You hit the yard and you tell them, what's up, man? I'm Frank Abagnale and I'm in here on a burglary. And they go, well, actually, Frank Abagnale's a pretty famous criminal. That's not you. Can I see your ID? Oh, John Smith. Well, let's look you up. What county are you out of? What year did you get arrested? And they'll Google you right then. It's not a common practice, but once they get the idea that you're lying, it's very easy for somebody to look you up, because on any given prison yard in California, there's at least a dozen cell phones. Not 100 out of 1,000 inmates. They're not common enough that everybody has one or even knows where to get one. But there's enough that if you think you can just, with impunity, lie about who you are mistaken. They're going to catch you and they're going to hurt you. Ideally, they're going to hurt you. Maybe it'll be a lot worse. Glenda Stevenson asks, Aaron, this may seem rather naive, but if a lifer without parole commits a crime behind bars, what becomes of him? He doesn't have much to lose, apparently. Well, and that's true and false. First, you have to understand, hope springs eternal. I knew a lot of dudes that had life without parole. They wanted to get out. They thought they were going to get out. They had a plan for, well, if I just do this for long enough, maybe they'll let me out. Heck, I've talked about my old Sally Wolf, who I finally just got a letter from, and he had life without parole. He's been in for like 40 years now. He's 70 years old, and he is up for a parole hearing in a year. Because after once he reached the age of, I believe it's 70, maybe it's 68, he's eligible for something called a compassionate release, which essentially means that the state has determined that you are no longer a threat to society, not because you're rehabilitated and reformed, but because you're close enough to death that they don't realistically think you're going to commit any more crimes, and they'll just parole you to a hospital or a rest home rather than deal with you in your last couple of years. If he had killed a couple people while he's incarcerated, gotten caught with drugs a couple of times, well, he would not be up for a compassionate release. While they don't necessarily need to believe you have been rehabilitated, they need to believe that you are no longer actively engaged in criminal behavior. Similarly, my co-defendant, Ty Abreu, who, and any time he comes up, I express very clearly, should not be in prison, and whatever his version of events is, because he and I were co-defendants, we're in for the same crime, it's the truth. If he says I'm guilty for everything and he did nothing, I'll stand in front of any board they want and say, yep, that's what happened. Because dude shouldn't be in prison. At least not if I'm out. I don't know how else to express that, and I'm glad I'm out, but he should not be in prison if I'm out. Anyway, he's up for parole also. Life without parole is one of those things that it doesn't necessarily always mean it, even if it usually does. And you just have to give somebody a little bit of hope. Still, there are some guys who take the other tact. I ain't never getting out, screw it. And the deal is, if you commit a crime, meaning something that they can send you to the SHU, the segregated housing unit, over, you get in a lot of trouble. There's a list of things that they don't care about. There's a list of things that they do care about. There's hundreds of different offenses you can commit in prison. Let's go ahead and take battery. And it's important to understand that battery is different than fighting. They have mutual combat, meaning you and the other guy started yelling at each other and got into it. And they have battery, meaning you walked up to the other guy and he did that and you binked him in the face. Or you walked up behind him and cracked him in the head with something. You didn't seriously injure him, but there's no question that you are the perpetrator and he is the victim. The first time you do it, they're going to give you a slap on the wrist, maybe a couple of weeks in the SHU, maybe they'll take away your canteen for 3 months, and they'll give you more prison time. They'll say, well, you have 3 more months in prison. Hope you like that. And somebody who has life without kind of laughs and goes, 3 more months? God, so after I die, you're not going to let me out for 3 months? That's a bummer. And so he does it again after he gets out of the SHU. And the second time, they go, well, you get the exact same punishment as before, plus extra for having been in trouble twice in this short period of time, probably an extra 6 months in the SHU. So even though all you did was walk up to a child molester that you knew he was a piece of garbage and you gave him a good little slap to the face and told him that's for hurting all them kids, the first time you didn't get in much trouble. The second time, you're gone for 6 months, maybe 9 months before you come back to the yard. And if you do it 3 times, because 3 is the magic number, 3 SHU terms within, I believe it's a 5-year period, and you're eligible for an indeterminate SHU, which means that the staff is allowed to keep you back, isolated from everybody else, by yourself, maybe with a cellie, but that is the most social interaction you will have indefinitely. Up to 12 years is the rule. And they might let you out in 3 months if you go out and grovel and go, please, boss, let me out of here, I can't do this, and they decide that you really mean it. Or, and this is more likely because the staff needs to fill those SHU beds somehow, they need to keep somebody back there in trouble, more likely they'll keep you back there for years. I had a friend, Alfalfa. He did 12 years in an indeterminate SHU. because he was validated as a member of the Nazi lowrider gang. And they just kept him back there. Even after he went, fine, I'm not a member of the gang anymore. I don't want to do this. I just want to get back out. They went, well, yeah, that's great. And in 5 years or so, if you mind your P's and Q's, we'll let you out of here. Here's Stretch. The kind of guy who has the attitude, there's nothing they can do to me. I'm just going to go out and commit trouble and heck with it. Heck with the consequences. Well, generally speaking, he's either back in the shoe forever, or he's only out for a couple of days and he does something stupid and he's gone again. Gina Lester asks, does a person coming to visit an inmate have to get patted down like at intake? Not generally. The rule is there are a bunch of requirements for what you can bring into the visiting room and what you can wear. They want you to wear something that's not too low cut, not too revealing, not too tight. Also, you can't wear certain colors. The cops all wear green. You can't show up in a green jumpsuit. The inmates all wear orange, white, or blue. You can't come up in an orange, white, or blue that looks like inmate clothing. Assuming that you are dressed appropriately, then they have a list of the things you can bring in. Everything you bring in has to be able to go through a metal detector for starters. So don't think that you're going to, hide a 9mm there inside of your pocket and they'll never notice. You're going to go through the metal detector. They're going to say, take everything metal out of your pockets. And you'll keep doing it until finally they go, really? That's everything metal out of your pockets? And then you have an option. You can refuse a search. You can go, no, I don't want you to search me. And they'll say, fine, get out. Get off of the prison grounds. This is private property. And don't come back until next week, and then we'll talk about it. That does happen occasionally. But if it's something easier to get away with, say a little bundle of heroin or something like that, which a lot of people do smuggle drugs into the institution through the visiting room, you realistically can get that through the metal detector because they're not going to pat you down unless they have probable cause. In the event that maybe an inmate wrote a kite and said, hey, Frank is going out to a visit and he said his friend's going to bring him some drugs, well, then they might say, hey, Frank, come here, we want to pat you down. If they're really prepared, they'll have arranged to have a warrant. And this does often happen in institutions where the person who was smuggling whatever into the institution shows up and they say, hey, we want to pat you down. And they go, no, I don't want you to pat me down. I'm going to leave. And then the sheriff is in the parking lot. And they call the sheriff, and he walks up to the prison visiting room and says, well, you can just wait right there. We have a warrant to search you, and we're going to take you and do it. Without a warrant, you have an absolute right for them to keep their hands off you, and very few people actually have to endure any kind of pat down or search or anything like that. Unless, for instance, if I wanted to visit a friend in prison, and I do, I will eventually be visiting some people, hopefully. Well, I will not be surprised if they subject me to an extra level of scrutiny. Similarly, if you were known as an active gang member, had a bunch of obvious tattoos or something like that, I'm willing to bet that they start the conversation with, hey, we want to search you. Do you mind or do you want to leave? Because that's the rule, is that they rarely ask to search people. And if you don't have a warrant, well, then you can leave. Joseph Reyes says he likes the channel. Keep them coming, and I absolutely will. And Gina Lester asks if I'm allowed to visit anyone in prison. As of last year, whenever I came off parole, I am technically allowed to visit people in prison. However, generally, inmates aren't allowed to visit inmates in prison, meaning after you parole and discharge your parole, you're not allowed to visit people in prison until you have been out for a pretty reasonable amount of time. I seem to recall that the rule of thumb is 1 month after discharging your parole for every year that you served in prison is the expected amount of time before you will be approved to visit somebody. I'll have to look that up again, and it's actually right about the time that it's time for me to start worrying about that. For myself, I have a couple of friends. Scooby off the gate, man. I want to go visit Scooby. He's a decent man, and for anybody who doesn't remember, I met the dude. He was 5 years into his term. His name's Brandon Mays. He's a burglar, a non-violent burglar who received a sentence of 25 to life under California's 3 strikes law. He fell in the early 90s. He's still in prison today, in spite of the fact that he hasn't committed any violent crimes and he's behaved himself. He got his GED, his associate's degree, and is working towards a paralegal. And goes in regularly and tells the board, come on, I want to get out and be a member of society and not a criminal. Look how much work I've done to do that. And he gets denied. It's not fair, and so I'd love to visit him and do anything I could to help him. I am theoretically allowed to visit inmates, but I don't expect I'm going to be practically allowed to visit inmates for at least another year or two. Shaliste Girl notes that you might as well put up your feet and take a nap, waiting for the guards to process you without an appointment, and that is absolutely correct. It will happen. Get comfortable. Anybody who has served in the military is familiar with the phrase, hurry up and wait, and I promise you it gets used in prison also. Hurry up and wait. Volkswagen notes, glad to hear about Wolf, just don't tell his brother. And that is absolutely correct. I believe his brother has already passed. And he made clear to me, I've had the opportunity to correspond to him just a little bit, that he is fully retired and rehabilitated and interested in being a functioning member of society. He has no bones left to pick, as it were. Whether it's true or not, who can tell what's in another man's mind? But being as how he's about 70 years old and has served, almost half of his life in prison, I think I can understand why he would be willing to let go of whatever had happened just to be able to see the sky again without all the concertina wire around the outside of the yard. Shaliste Girl notes that gang colors are also not allowed for visiting inmates, and that is correct. Not just gang colors, but anything that speaks to a gang stuff. If you want to go out there with your bandana tied on your waist, or you want to go out there with your shirt that is obviously referencing crime, criminality, gang stuff, they'll tell you have to change. Interestingly, they don't mean you have to leave. They actually have a trailer there at the visiting, which is run by outside third-party people called the Friends Outside organization. I'm not sure if they receive state funding or if they are privately funded, but one of the services that they provide is that they have a wide variety of sizes and shapes of clothes for people to wear if they need to, that are laundered between visits. So in the event that you show up with your I'm a gang member t-shirt and your bandana hanging on your waist, and they say, sorry, you can't come in here to see your friend, and you go, well, that's not fair. I drove all this way. I don't have any clothes to change into, and I don't want to drive to Walmart and change. That'll take hours. They'll send you back out to that trailer, and they'll give you a pair of sweatpants and a sweatshirt and a hat to wear, just so that it's different than the stuff you were wearing, and it's all approved. It's a pretty neat service they provide, all things considered, because they do have the option of just saying, gosh, it's a bummer you didn't know the rules. Have a nice day somewhere else. And that would be truly unfortunate for somebody who visited a family member from a long, long distance away. California is a big state. You can drive 12, 14 hours to see somebody, and to get turned away at the gate because you forgot about a rule or because you didn't understand something, well, that'd be just devastating for anybody. Here for the last note that he's a little late, but he's glad to see me putting out content, sharing and educating. And I'm glad to be putting out content, honestly. If we're honest, I tend to run these live streams just a little bit short because these lights I have on me, man, they're hot. But I'm enjoying talking to y'all, and thank you so much for all of the communication. Everybody who's active in the chat makes my job, frankly, a little bit easier because I don't know what to talk about if y'all don't ask questions. Sunset asks if I ever have dreams or nightmares about that time frame. If I'm being honest, I have a pretty severe sleep apnea, which one of the things it does is it makes it so that you don't generally remember your dreams very well because your sleep is so scattered and interrupted. What I do have, and it's frankly kind of difficult to deal with on occasions, is I have a moment of disorientation. Right around the time I go to sleep, right around the time I wake up, that twilight period where you're just drifting off and you're not quite sure where you are or what's going on and you're about to start dreaming or just finished. And something is wrong. I'll realize this room is too big, this bed is too soft. I can't hear the toilets flushing down the tier. Something, and I snap up looking around trying to figure out what's changed. Everybody's being quiet. Is something going on? I've never gotten used to not being in a cell. I don't know if I ever will. And I suppose it's just a tiny little piece of institutionalization that has stuck with me. Gina Lester asks, if it's true an inmate in the visiting room can't take money to go buy vending machine food and can't touch money, that is absolutely correct. In fact, you're not supposed to touch the food before it's cooked, and you're not allowed to take it to the microwave. You're not allowed to go get, they have a little area with spoons and ketchup and whatever. You can't get any of that stuff. I would ask my wife very politely, hey honey, would you go see if they have any of those good burritos and bring back a couple of extra hot sauce packets? And I would sit there and wait. If I truly wanted, I could have stood up and walked about halfway to the vending machines with her, and there's a little yellow line about 6 feet away from all of this area. And unless you're specifically authorized to interact with that area, they'll write you up for it. They'll cancel your visit. They'll say, geez, it's a bummer you didn't know those rules. Your family drove 14 hours and you didn't read the rules? That sucks for you. You're getting written up and they're going home. Good luck with that. At one point, I was the inmate porter in a visiting room, meaning that my job was to make sure that this area that the other inmates aren't allowed to interact with was properly stocked and cleaned. And it was always interesting. I actually had a key, not many inmates get keys, that opened up the little area at the bottom with all the paper towels and taco sauce and things like that. And it was my job to occasionally go up there, wipe everything down with a washcloth, move stuff so that it was stocked. And I would be the one inmate amongst all of the visiting family who was allowed to do that type of thing. Let's see here. I think that is about as much as I'm going to speak on the visiting room right now. And unless anybody happens to pop out with just one more question that they need answered, I'm going to close here. But I have enjoyed doing these live streams and speaking to some degree about what inmate visiting is like. I think next time I may speak briefly about the inmate family visiting. Family visiting, also called conjugal visiting, or in the informal nomenclature, the boneyard, is where inmates are allowed to spend real periods of time with their family if they're eligible. Every 3 months or so, sometimes as rarely as every 6, I was allowed to spend 2 whole days, 48 hours, near 48 hours, with my wife or my son. And I can't tell you the difference in quality of life. It was like not being in prison for a couple of days, and more importantly, it reminded me why I was working so hard to not get in trouble, why I needed to mind my P's and Q's and get out. You want my opinion as to the one program that really incentivizes positive behavior and that they should have everywhere, and that they should take away from you if you get in trouble? Oh, don't get in a fight, we'll take this away. It's those family visits, those overnight visits with your family. They are not all that common in CDC, but most inmates who program and work towards them are able to get them, and I can't imagine a better reward for positive program. Sunset asks, what's my favorite way to relax? I play video games, honestly. I've been a gamer all my life since I was a little kid. I remember I was 5. My parents bought my first Nintendo. Role-playing, real-time strategy, turn-based strategy. Dark Souls 3, I actually just completed, which I'm a little proud of because that game's so stinking hard. No one cares about video games, but that's most of what I do to relax if I'm not reading. And reading is the other thing I've done just all my life. Max thanks me for some good content and wishes me a good night. Boomerang Time asks, was my friend Scooby a bank burglar or a residential sneak thief? He was a sneak thief, and he was good at it too. I actually got to read some of his paperwork where the district attorney was complaining that every time he paroled, because he was one of those revolving door inmates, get in trouble, get out in 6 months, get in trouble, get out in a year, get in trouble, get out in 9 months, get again and again. He had a real rap sheet before they finally struck him out with 25 to life. Wow, he committed a lot of burglaries and got away with them. I guess he was good at what he did, except when they finally did catch him, they broke him off. All right, thank you so much for everybody who tuned in. Thank you for listening, and have a good evening.